Hey there, and welcome to Finlos Lives, and this is the first episode of 2024. Well, I had to think about it there for a second. 2024. And in preparation for this episode, I did something which I don't usually do, and I listened to an old episode, specifically last year's New Year episode, which was titled New Year Energy. And I mean, I listen to my episodes sometimes, but usually not in their entirety. I like to get a sense for how something sounds, and also just because I listen to the entire thing several times in the editing process, the final episode tends to be something that I check out just to make sure that it's there and it's present and it meets my standard of what I want it to sound like. But just to make sure that I kind of remembered what I did last year and to keep things consistent, I actually listened to the entire episode. And man, I was actually really satisfied with how that sounded. And so it was kind of cool to be able to listen to that episode in its entirety. This episode is not going to be as complex as that one was. I covered 4 different topics, but I think it'll still be fun. It'll still be fun just to do. But I kind of wanted to pat myself on the back there a little bit as I reviewed sort of some old content and reflected on the last year, the 2023, which was a doozy of a year. Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that I'm not retrotting old material. And it's actually going to get into one of the topics or one of the themes that I address, which is traditions. And so I think it is valuable to have a pattern or a routine of what something can look or feel or sound like, but making sure that the content itself or the meat of what that thing is still fresh and new. You know, maybe sometimes it's okay to be a little bit repetitive because that's how tradition is made, right? Repetition. Last year I commented how arbitrary the New Year celebration is because it's just the year is a circle and we just went around and around and again. And even New Year's Day, as we celebrate it here in the United States and other countries or cultures that have adopted this specific calendar, you know, there are places that have different measures for the years, different measures for the months. So even this tradition is not a universal, and I think that's really fun and important thing to think about. How traditions grow and evolve, and how we can actually, in our lives and in our families, build new traditions. And so I think something that I'm thinking a lot about as I take this arbitrary new year and think about what I want to do, because as I stated last year, beginnings are important because it gives us sort of a chance to take a deep breath mentally and consider where we've been and where we're going. But as I'm thinking about this in a sort of micro way, it is having me, or it is forcing me or challenging me maybe to consider the traditions that we make, those that we observe, those that we choose to participate in, and those we have been encouraged to participate in, which may not necessarily represent who we are anymore. And sometimes deciding that it's okay to walk away from traditions and embrace new ones, because we are growing, changing, evolving people all the time. You know, this has been sort of very present in the past couple of weeks. Our younger daughter, her birthday is December 31st, and she struggles with it because she wants to have the tradition of the birthday celebration, which is generally a celebration of all eyes on that individual, right? It's one of the few times when being the center of attention is acknowledged and is encouraged. But she feels that her celebration is in direct competition with this other tradition, which is the celebration of New Year. And she thinks of it as a universal unfairness, that somehow she got wronged by the universe. And in addition, we have other family traditions. It's a community tradition that school is out at this time to give students a break, to allow them to celebrate with families for winter holidays, New Year. And because of that, it's one of the few times when we can travel, because we actually have that time. And traveling is not her favorite thing to do because she gets car sick, she gets air sick sometimes. And she is a person who definitely longs for the comfort of home and being in her safe spaces. And so all of these things are combining: the being away from home, being in new places, celebrating a tradition that competes with her celebration. And it really sometimes can turn into a negative experience for her. I don't know. I think it's important that we, well, the compromise, I guess, before I move on, the compromise that we usually do is that we will acknowledge her birthday on the 31st. We'll usually have a cake. We'll usually have at least one gift. And it's usually just the immediate family. It's Eva and our two daughters and me, and we'll celebrate her. But it's low-key, it's small, it's quiet. And then, usually in the new year, in the first couple of weeks of the new year in January, we will have a proper birthday party. She still thinks this is unfair, although it's our perspective that not everybody gets to celebrate their birthday twice, and that most people, especially as they get older, tend not to really celebrate their birthday on the day, usually because they're working or because they're school, and so you get what I'm saying. But it's very easy for her to focus on the negative aspect of that experience, and that these things are detracting from the tradition that should be all about her. And so we try to use that as an opportunity to remind her, and in doing so, remind ourselves that as we experience these things, that it's important that we consider how we are experiencing traditions and celebrations and moments in time, because there's the very real experience, but then there's also the part of experience that is choice and perception. And those two things can relate sometimes, and we can choose to see things more negatively or more positively sometimes. That's not always the case, obviously. There are genuinely bad and genuinely good experiences. But in this case, we encourage her to find the positive, to know the positive, to see the positive, the togetherness, the celebration, the joy. But I'm curious, what are your traditions? What ways have you found to build tradition and routine, and ways that become the threads that tie your family or the closest people to you together? Because I think tradition is a way to create continuity and to not just experience life as a series of days, one after the other, and instead seeing life as a continuous series of experiences that are related and that build upon each other. And traditions are the way that we as individuals combine those experiences to form an interrelated thread. Some examples of things that we do are common, right? We have holidays, and we sort of inherit traditions from our families and then modify them. And some of those are great and some of them are not. And so we grew up celebrating Christmas, but we're not specifically Christian. So we're sort of shedding that aspect of the holiday and instead embracing the more together and familial aspects of the tradition of coming together at the winter solstice, and the acknowledgement of the natural aspects, the the longest night of the year, the changing of the season to winter, being in tune and attuned to our bodies as we sort of slip into a more dormant phase of the year, as many of the things in nature around us are doing, finding the spiritual connections in that. And so inheriting some of those traditions and modifying them and growing them to be more in sync and more in tune with our values and the things that we hold important. And then what are your personal traditions? My favorite go-to example is when I was a teacher, when I was in the classroom, a way to help me ground in the process of mentally preparing to start a new cycle of the year for the school year, getting to know new students, getting to become acclimated back to the classroom. It was a very relaxing and grounding process. I would take all of my button-up shirts, I would clean them, and then I would iron them. And I have a lot of shirts, and it would take me a couple of hours, but I would put on some music and I would just iron the shirts. And I do miss that sometimes. It's a tradition that I valued very much because I love the feel of the fabric and the smell of the clean shirts and the steam and all of that. It was a very pleasurable process, very tactile and very sensory. But then there's the other traditions that we have in our lives that are sort of taught to us, that we're indoctrinated into, that we're exposed to through culture, that we sometimes take advantage of because they're there, but that don't always necessarily hold to our values or our life desires or our choices. And the one that comes to mind immediately is the Black Friday. This is one of the most, if not the most consumeristic wastes of energy that happens every year. The obsessive searching for the best deals for products that, first of all, are overpriced to begin with because they're old, and it's really just a means of businesses and stores and corporations to empty their shelves of the old stock in order to make way for new while still making a profit. It's exciting and it's fun, and it really, like, I get it, and I have participated in the Black Friday madness, but in recent years, it's silly, and I try to avoid it more than anything. And so I'm just curious, if you think about the traditions that you've embraced or that you've built or that you've inherited, what are they? And how are you making space for building new traditions for you and your family, or for the people who are closest to you in your life? The episode that I did for New Year last year was titled New Year Energy, because, as often happens in the new year, I felt a sense of a refreshing or an opportunity to start something new, or just an excitement for the beginning of something. And I think it's a common experience. It's a common feeling, and it's why we create these ways to recognize the cycles. So I think that is a very real thing. But I want to acknowledge that this year feels a little different. This new year, I'm not experiencing that New Year energy in quite the same way. And I'm just curious why that might be. It's not a sense of depression, although that is something that I know that I grapple with, as many people do. And I think it's a very rational response to the complicated world that we live in. It's not that I'm not excited for the new year. It's not that I don't intend to reflect on goals that I set last year, to think about where I am in my life and how I can look forward and continue to refresh myself and make sure that I'm continuing to grow into the person that I want to be. I think all of those things are still true, but I think last year was rough, and for immediate reasons that are specific to our experiences here in our community, but also just there's a God, I'm trying really hard not to be melodramatic and not to sound like over the top, but there's a darkness, there's a weight, there's a mood, there's a a miasma of negativity. It is a real feeling. I think part of it is that people are tired, and we have been tired for a long time. And I'm wondering why that is. And I think part of it has to do with information. And we have access to it all the time. And I know that I'm a person who engages with information as part of my job, but also as a way of maintaining sanity in my daily life. It is a way that I cope. It is how I gain a sense of understanding, is to have an idea of what is going on locally, nationally, internationally, and have a sense of where I am in the world. It's very important to me to be informed to the best of my ability. But at the same time, it is heavy. It is heavy. And I wonder if you think about how you consume information. What are your habits for doing that? Do you use social media? Do you read the news? Do you watch the news? Do you try to avoid those things because they can sometimes be negative, or because you're not sure what is real or what is positive and what is good? I'm curious about that because I just know that so much is available to us all the time. And I think that that is incredibly powerful and incredibly important. And I think that it is something that I would not give up. Thinking about the limitations of my childhood, and as a person who, Ev and I talk about this as our generation, again, arbitrary measures of time or generations, but we are people who were born in the analog era, but who came of age in the digital era. So we have our feet straddling both sides of that divide. I can remember life before information was readily available, and that the barriers to gaining that information were very real. They weren't impossible, they weren't hard, but we were limited by broadcast TV, the evening news, and what we could read in a newspaper or magazines. And those were very slow moving sources of information by comparison, and very limited, because we don't think about how what a broadcast news station or program or a newspaper or a magazine, what they choose to report are curated. All information is curated and therefore limited by the perspectives of the people who are organizing it. So I would not go back to that, because I can find multiple outlets for information. Sometimes they disagree, sometimes they agree, sometimes there's overlap, and I can create an amalgam of information which at least approximates the truth. But it's exhausting, and it's daunting, and I think my sense is that we have, as a species, I don't want to even say culture, because as a species, I think that we have crossed a threshold, and I don't know what it is. It's a feeling. It's a sense that there have been times when atrocities could be committed and people not know about it. Or if they knew about it, it took time to know about it for that information to spread. Crimes could be committed and never come to light. And I think we're seeing, and I hope it's for the better, I believe it's for the better, that atrocities are not invisible, and the people who are experiencing these things now have the means by which to share those experiences. And to use the cliche, speak truth to power. And now it is up to us to listen, to hear, to see, to feel, and to take action. And it's hard, and it's scary, and it's draining, and it costs relationships, and it forces us to challenge our own beliefs every single day, because it's so much easier to take for granted whatever version of the truth our most comfortable sources tell us, but that's not always right, and it's definitely not always safe. I think that's something that I'm trying to sit with right now, and I don't know how to use that as a motivator for this new year, because I think that last year, Eva and I, and this is coming from Eva to give her full credit, we thought of, instead of resolutions, we were trying to focus on themes for the year. And last year, my theme was enrichment, how I can take the experiences of each moment and make sure that they were rich and full, and that I used them to their fullest. I don't know quite where I am with a theme for this year, but I feel like this sort of gut feeling, this sense of shift is going to play in somehow. I don't know how yet. I don't know where it's going, but that's where I am with 2024 right now. I think 2023 was something shifted, and I don't think that we can stand not to hold people accountable anymore. I think that's just the truth of it, is that there are folks, there are people, there are individual human beings who are being actively harmed all the time. And we have the tools to see it and to change it and to fight it and to hold the people who are doing the harm accountable, even if we are those people. And that's the scary part, right? Because we all are part of this, and we all become complicit at some point through our inaction. And I think that's really where that shift is now happening, because more than ever, we are hearing that question: what are you going to do about it? What am I going to do about it? So to start to close this out, cycles are always happening. Years are cycles, days are cycles, weeks are cycles. And we set these goals and we set these themes for ourselves to sort of measure progress, to set milestones and benchmarks, and to measure our growth. And sometimes it's okay, right? A year might not be enough time. Sometimes that cycle just takes a little bit longer, or we need to allow for a different kind of cycle to occur. So please, I'm encouraging you to be gentle with yourself, give yourself grace. Remember that you are a growing, learning, evolving creature who is in a complex, intricate, interrelated world, and that it's okay. That I feel powerless at times to change myself, let alone change anything else in the world. And it's okay to sit with that. If you feel that, know that you're not alone, that we all feel it. It's there. We can't change or fix everything all at once, and it happens over time. But it has to happen. It has to happen, little by little. So as I think about what this next cycle is gonna look like, I want to think of it in terms of cycles within cycles. How is this measure of time going to apply to a larger measure of time? And so on and so forth. Because I want to consider and live more meaningfully into the idea of reciprocity, that all things should be a give and a take, that conversations and dialogues, relationships, there is a give and a take. There is a sharing. There is a receiving and a sending. And I think that cycles should be doing that. If you think of the image of the Ouroboros, the serpent or the dragon eating its own tail, that is a cycle. It is a devouring of the self in order to rebirth. And I want you to think of yourself in that term. How are you reflecting on who you were in order to become who you want to be? And to close out, I do want to talk about the podcast. This will be the third full year that I'm working on it. And it happens in cycles, of course, right? Like the moon. There's really productive seasons or times, and then there's slower times. And that's okay. And I beat myself up about it sometimes because I really want to do more. I really want to share more. I really want to produce more. I really want to write more. I really want to record more, ultimately. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But Eva and I were having a really great conversation just yesterday. We were walking, and I was talking about my process. We were actually talking about this year and what we want to grow. We started talking about my process for the podcast and why I sometimes struggle to produce more episodes. And she's such an amazing person to talk to because she asks the important questions and is perceptive to the currents of behaviors that I sometimes don't even realize in myself. And it's probably why she's such an amazing therapist. But you know, it's a creative process, and why podcasting is so important to me, as I've retreading things I've already said, so I'm sorry, but I want to talk about it a little bit. It is hard to find success in creative endeavors because we are often very harsh critics of our own work, and this is something that I feel like I'm pretty good at, and so it's very important and valuable to me. And the things that I do produce, even though they're largely for me, I still want them to be good for the person who does choose to listen, who does grant me their time. That's a huge valuable thing to me. But I do struggle with it because it is a process, and man, time is hard to come by sometimes. I've always intended for the podcast to be reflective of my internal processing of the world, and so it often functions as a journal of sorts. But this idea of reciprocity is something that I'm seeking to live in reciprocity. So I would like for the time that you give me and that you give to these recordings to be repaid value for value with engagement and provocation. I want you to feel and respond. I want you to think or feel that I am offering something of equal value to the time that you're giving. So I'm going to do what I haven't done as directly in the past and actually ask what it is that you look for when you give your time to audio content. What are the episode types that I've released that you have been most interested in? And what would you like me to talk about more? The data shows, as I've looked at the charts and the listen counts, episodes that have guests where I do interviews, especially when Eva is the co-host, they have the biggest audience, which tells me that those are the most engaging and the episodes that most people tend to engage with more. So I definitely intend to produce more of those types of shows. But in the times when it's just me behind the mic, like right now, is there a style or something that I can offer content-wise that will make the show better? Because knowing that I can produce content that would be more appealing would definitely assist with my motivation. And hopefully the audience, you, will get more of what you enjoy hearing in return. There's that reciprocity. I would love to hear your thoughts. And that's it for this episode. Thanks for giving me your time. If you have comments, questions, or suggestions for future topics, please leave a comment on social media, send an email to finlos@finloslives.com, or leave a voice message via the SpeakPipe app at finloslives.com. Happy New Year, and I look forward to our next conversation.